welcome to Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya. We are going to talk about the war in Ethiopia, floods in South Asia, and UK to get new Prime Minister in Liz Truss. We begin with the conflict in Ethiopia, where the rebel Tigray People's Liberation Front or TPLF resumed hostilities against the government on August 24. This is the latest round of fighting in a conflict which began in 2020 and has caused a major humanitarian disaster. The TPLF has been accused of looting food trucks and forced conscriptions and reportedly has the backing of the US and its allies. Meanwhile, Ethiopian diaspora are planning protests on Tuesday against the role of these Western powers. Prashant is with us for more. Prashant, could you start with giving us some background into this round of fighting?
Right, so Pragya, like you said, the conflict began in November 2020, and we must remember that the TPLF, although it is often portrayed as a rebel group, was actually the ruling force in Ethiopia for close to 3 decades, until 2018 when mass protests forced it out. Abiy Ahmed, who is the prime minister now, he came to power at that point with a different vision of Ethiopia, which was far more integrated and far more nationalistic in some senses, as opposed to the Ethiopia of the TPLF, where there was more autonomy for individual tribes and communities. So Abiy Ahmed had a very different vision, and the TPLF has not really been very enthusiastic about this vision because it has been reduced to a marginal force in the system. So there's always been a simmering conflict that broke out in November 2020. Now the important thing to remember, of course, is that in June, towards the end of June 2021, the Ethiopian government marked one round of ceasefire. Again, hostilities resumed. Again in March, or end of February, March this year, there was another ceasefire that the Ethiopian government again declared, although it advanced in both occasions close to, the Tigray itself, but it did not enter Tigray, at least in the second instance. And now we see that this conflict has broken out once again. Now, what are the reasons for it? We'll come to some of the foreign involvement aspect later, but we do know, of course, that there is a major humanitarian disaster. The TPLF is seeking to from many reports, the TPLF is trying to seek this occasion to resume its offensive from where it had been beaten back, which is some of the other states, the state of Amhara, for instance. And a key focus point is some of the arterial highways that link Addis Ababa to the capital Addis Ababa to other parts of the country. So that's really the the broad focus, and we also, like you said, there have been many allegations of the fact that the TPLF is using forced conscription and using these waves, the formation of attack which involves waves of attackers being thrown at the enemy, leading to a lot of casualties as well. So that's an allegation that has been leveled against the TPLF, that it is using these kind of techniques. So what we're unfortunately going to see probably is another round of very brutal fighting. We do know that the TPLF was attacking key areas in the Amhara state, and Amhara militias along with the Ethiopian government's army have been fighting back against it. In both instances of fighting over the past nearly 2 years, we've seen a massive humanitarian crisis, a large number of people across the country and in Tigray specifically being extremely food insecure. The World Food Programme's attempts at feeding some of these have not really worked out. Again, there are allegations against the TPLF that they have looted some of these food trucks, including very recently. And so what we're unfortunately looking at is another prolonged bit of fighting, maybe if negotiations don't work out. And this also brings us to the other question, which is what the role of the international powers is.
Right, and why are the diaspora protesting? That's also an interesting phenomenon right now.
What's going on? The diaspora's protests actually have a lot to do with this aspect. So we do know that after the last ceasefire, there was an attempt to actually have some negotiations. And the African Union was very closely involved in these negotiations. And this is, I think, something which is important, because the idea that countries in a neighborhood should work together, should negotiate, and whatever mediation that should happen should also happen internally, is, I think, a key plank that many countries across the world are talking about right now. We see the same in West Asia, for instance, where countries are increasingly keen that they want to solve their differences among themselves. But the TPLF is not very happy with this arrangement. So, in fact, 2 days before their attack resumed, there were allegations or claims by the TPLF that they were not happy with this AU-led process. There were a series of recent visits by US and EU officials to the TPLF as well, and the TPLF seems to want the US and EU to also play a large part in these negotiations. So that is one of the claims they make. They're dismissing the AU-led, the African Union-led process and saying that we want a global process, so to speak, and they're making claims on those lines. And I think the Ethiopian diaspora, and we must also remember, like I said, that the TPLF during its time in power was very powerfully strongly backed by the US. In fact, there are analysts who say that the 2020 conflict that began around November was also due to the fact that the Joe Biden administration was about to come to power, and they were, in some senses, encouraging their old allies who were the TPLF. So it looks like, so for many people in Ethiopia and in the continent, these offensives were also connected to the larger US geopolitical game in Africa itself, the fact that they want to retain some kind of dominance in the Horn of Africa region, and the fact that Abiy Ahmed, and also due to his close, his working together with Ethiopia, with Eritrea, and for that matter, in the sense was trying to create some kind of a regional bloc where the US did not have so much of a say. So, which is why the role of the US and the US especially, and also its allies, are especially noteworthy in this conflict. And the Ethiopian diaspora's argument also is that these countries are enabling and emboldening the TPLF to continue with its attacks, to continue with its warfare at various kinds of policies which are enhancing the human rights, the humanitarian disaster in that region. So that's also the context for this, and it sort of remains to be seen how it will pan out, in the sense that if the Ethiopian government is able, if the AU-led process or the AU-mediated process will be able to continue, which is really important for that region, because the US and the EU entering is definitely not a recipe for anything good. It could even go the other way around. So the conflict is very sort of carefully poised at this point of time, very delicately poised at this point of time. We do need to see what happens in the fighting in the coming days as well.
Right, Prashant. Thanks very much for that update. There are catastrophic floods in Afghanistan and Pakistan right after floods in Bangladesh and India. Flash floods in South Asia have devastated incomes of millions of people, especially the small farmers and the poor. Unprecedented rainfall-induced flash floods currently have affected 30 of 34 Afghan provinces. Over 100,000 Afghans are affected and many have died. A third of Pakistan, more than 33 million people, is battling unprecedented flooding as well. Domestic food supplies and relief shipments to Afghanistan from Pakistan, where nearly 23 million depend on humanitarian aid, are affected. Weeks ago, heat waves damaged rice crops in Bangladesh and lowered wheat production in India. D. Raghunandan from the All India People's Science Network and Delhi Science Forum is here to explain these phenomena. Raghu, thanks for joining us. Can you start by telling us, I know we've talked about this many times before, but what is the connection between global climate change and the flooding we've seen recently in South Asia?
Yeah, normally there is talk that you cannot accurately correlate specific weather events with climate change. But I think in the context of the past 2 years, the various weather events that we have seen all over the Northern Hemisphere, in the Indian subcontinent, in Europe, in North America, in Canada, everywhere you are seeing extreme weather phenomena, whether it is extreme rainfall or flooding or drought or forest fires. These are all extremes of weather which have been increasingly manifesting in the Northern Hemisphere, and there is no other reason for these than climate change. And scientists have in fact said that by doing modeling of these weather phenomena, they find that there is no other explanation other than climate change, and that if you had to have any other reason, then you would have had maybe 100 times more of such phenomena than they exist. So it is quite clear that it is climate change that is resulting in these floods. And if you want me to get a little more specific about Pakistan itself, in Pakistan this year we saw what we also witnessed in India, which is an early onset of the monsoon and rather heavy monsoon rains. Now this happened even more so in Pakistan. In April and May in Pakistan, you had prolonged heat waves, temperatures above 40, the mid 40s, lasting continuously for 5 to 6 weeks, which is itself rare. and also one of the phenomena driven by climate change, which is predicted more frequent and more extreme heat waves. So we witnessed that in Pakistan. And because of the heat waves, the atmosphere, when it gets that hot, the hotter the atmosphere gets, the more moisture it can hold. So it keeps absorbing moisture from the ocean winds, absorbs that moisture, and then when the rains start, all that moisture comes tumbling down, resulting in extreme rainfall. So you had that in Pakistan. Initially, high temperatures, long heat waves, leading even to a 50 degrees
Right.
temperatures in Jacobabad and other places, and then extremely heavy precipitation. And along with extreme heavy precipitation, because of the high temperatures, you also had more than normal melt of the glaciers in the hills, which then meant you get sudden bursts of a lot of water coming tumbling down the rivers, which are already swollen with monsoon rains, on top of which they get these sudden bursts of glacial waters, which results in flash floods,
Right.
which cause a lot of damage, as we saw in Pakistan. In Pakistan today, uh, Sindh and Baluchistan provinces have received, on average, more than 5 times the normal rainfall, while the rest of Pakistan has received maybe 3 times the normal rainfall, which gives you an idea of the kind of heavy rains that they have had. And compounding this in Pakistan, you have a shortage of storage infrastructure in Pakistan, not enough dams or bunds or other such mechanisms for flood control. So when the rains come in the plains of Pakistan, in Sindh, Baluchistan, and higher up in the Punjab, the water has nowhere to go except
Right,
just
Raghu.
flooding across all the lands. There's nothing stopping it. There's no dam holding it back or storing the water. So everything goes under the flood waters.
Raghu, this is also coming at a very great cost to the economies of these countries where the floods are happening and to the people. Can you talk a little about the mitigation strategies? What can be done?
See, you can't mitigate climate change in the short run on a country by country basis in any case. The mitigation has to be done globally. If globally we are able to contain temperature rise, then we will be able to contain extreme rainfall. However, I think for the next 15 to 20 years, the world will have to suffer from extreme weather events because climate change that we have brought about has already caused these changes. And you can't just turn off a switch and bring everything back to normal the next year. Temperatures have already risen, which have resulted in these changes in climate. For temperatures to go back to levels that they were, say, a decade ago, will take another decade or 15 years to normalize. So this is something, one, that we'll have to learn to live with for another decade or so. But we can take adaptive measures, preventive measures to ensure that the damage does not get very severe. And what Pakistan in particular could do would be to increase storage volumes for excess water through whatever means, through dams or bunds or more extensive canal systems, to take the water away from habitations and towns. That's one measure that could be done over the next several years. And you can take measures to increase the flow of the water into the ocean through canals or other such systems to take the water away. But these are not short-term solutions. These are not solutions which are going to help tomorrow or the next year. Even these are medium-term solutions that will start showing effects maybe 5 to 10 years down the line.
And we also have this kind of flash floods happening in Afghanistan. We saw them in Bangladesh. We saw severe heat wave followed by heavy monsoon.
Absolutely. And the flash floods in Pakistan and Afghanistan are largely because of more rapid melt of glaciers and of snow and ice on the mountains. In India, we have, and in Bangladesh, the flash floods are as a result of heavy flows in the water, but some catchments which store the water temporarily and then release them all of a sudden. In Pakistan, this time you have had collapses of glacial lakes, for example, because suddenly with the heat waves, those lakes have just burst their banks and melted and come down into the thing. So that's a result of the heat waves and high temperatures. And you're likely to have those. We've had those in India as well, in Himachal and in Uttarakhand, because of increased snow melt and glacier melts in the higher reaches of the Himalayas.
Right, Raghu, thanks very much for joining us. Conservative MP Liz Truss, close to former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, is the new Tory chief and Prime Minister designate. It was widely expected to be her or ex-Chancellor Rishi Sunak. Both promised plans to revive the British economy, struggling under the worst cost of living crisis in 40 years. But the weeks-long campaign, though ending in victory for Truss, has made the party appear disconnected from soaring inflation and worker unrest of many months. Truss has promised an energy bill freeze, but her plan was weak on detail and criticized for how it would hike power bills for years. Truss also defended tax cuts for companies to revive the economy. Anish from People's Dispatch is here to talk to us about this. Anish, do you think Liz Truss is the answer to Britain's cost of living crisis?
I think at least she thinks she is, or at least she wants us to think that she is. In many ways, the answer is, well, an emphatic no, considering that it is a Conservative Party MP, and considering that a Conservative Party MP and who has declared that she will administer and govern as a Conservative is really not an answer for the kind of crisis that British people are going through right now. If you look at some of the specifics of the policies that she has given us, one includes subsidies for households that are going through high energy prices, and that might help in this short run, but there is no clear plan of how she's going to deliver that, what kind of conditionalities she will be putting up many of these households through to qualify for the sort of subsidies that she's, or what kind of subsidies even we're talking about, what is the level of these subsidies. But other than that, if you look at other stuff, like she's not going to hike corporate taxes, she's going to, in fact, reverse the promise of hiking corporate tax of 25% that is supposed to be effective next year, and retain it to the current 19%. She is not going to increase any of the levies. In fact, she is also going to create specific special zones, which she said would be low regulation zones to attract investments. So a whole host of very neoliberal activities that we usually expect IMF to impose on third world nations is going to be replicated here in the United Kingdom. And this is definitely a sort of Margaret Thatcher 2.0 in the making. And if she is obviously going to deliver on these promises, that is what we are going to be looking at. And that is obviously not an answer. We had talked about this in the previous episode, talking the same about how the cost of living crisis is a poor management, at least in the case of the United Kingdom, considering that the United Kingdom is one of the worst affected in the G7 nations. And it has to do largely with how badly the government has taken up the issue of inflation, about energy prices, about even rationing energy has not been a very sustainable model right now that they have given us. So this is definitely something that Truss has to deal with. How she's going to deal with it is definitely something that we need to look out for and keep watching. But so far, what we have seen, it's not something that is going to actually help the working class or the masses of of United Kingdom of Britain to actually deal with something that is going to put inflation rates at 20% next year, or energy prices to almost double by next year. So this is something. The answer again to your question is an emphatic no again.
Right, Anish. Anish, also, like, how is she going to be in the world with the hawkish position that she has taken? Do you think that is going to be a source of more discord around the world?
Definitely. In the case, if you look at some of the promises that she has made, and even her record as the foreign secretary, it has not been very encouraging. She is one of those who believes that China needs to be contained. She is also one of those who believe that China needs to be sanctioned for supposedly for all these allegations of whatever happened, human rights allegations that the West has been raising over the past few years now. She is also one of those who believes that that Britain should be part of what is called the new Marshall Plan for Ukraine in their war against Russia. Then there is also the fact that she wants to create the Commonwealth nations as a bulwark against China. So obviously, her policies towards Russia and China, two of the greater powers right now, in what is emerging to be a multipolar world, is not very well, let's to say, not very friendly. In fact, in many ways, it is trying to amp up if not enmity, but the sort of hostility that the United Kingdom, as part of the greater NATO coalition, the pro-US coalition, is already pushing these countries with respect to their foreign policies. We also need to wait and watch, because she has talked about increasing military budget, and as one of the first things that she will be doing in her supposedly new budget that she will be presenting as a prime minister. And that also is an alarming thing, because Britain's military budget is one of the highest in the world. It is already one of the biggest arms exporters. And when you talk about hiking that military budget to whatever percentage that she is talking about, it is not an encouraging thing, especially in the European continent right now, where tensions are already high, where we already are seeing the after effects of the hostilities with Russia and the European Union affecting everybody, to the point that people are looking at uncertain winters of whether or not they can even insulate themselves from the severe cold that might be coming in the next few months. And despite that, there are talks about hiking military spending, and that is an alarming thing, obviously, for the world to see.
Right, Anish. Thanks very much for joining us. And that is all we have for you today. Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. Do come back to us tomorrow. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And for more news and analysis from around the world, visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org.